6 words can erase a lifetime of expectations. I learned that on a quiet Tuesday afternoon while standing in my kitchen, holding a phone in one hand and a shopping list in the other. For months, I had been waiting for news about my son's wedding. Not because I wanted to control it. Not because I expected a grand celebration. I simply wanted to be there. My name is Patricia Morgan. I am 71 years old, and Ryan is my only child. Ever since he called 6 months earlier to tell me he had proposed to Emily, I had been excited in the way only a mother can be. I imagined helping choose flowers. I imagined sitting in the audience, watching my son begin a new chapter of his life. I imagined family photographs that would someday sit on a mantle for future generations to see. Nothing extravagant. Just memories. That afternoon, I was standing beside the kitchen counter when I decided to call Emily. Ryan had been unusually busy lately, and every time I asked about wedding plans the answer was vague. Dates had not been finalized. Venues were still being considered. Details were being worked out. At least that was what I had been told. When Emily answered, she sounded cheerful, relaxed, happy. We exchanged a few pleasantries before I finally asked the question that had been on my mind for weeks. "So," I said with a smile, "when is the wedding?" There was a brief pause. Then Emily laughed lightly. "Oh, Patricia," she said. "We got married yesterday." For a moment I thought I had misheard her. The words felt disconnected from reality. "Yesterday," I repeated. "Yes," she replied casually. "It was a small ceremony. Very intimate." I stared out the kitchen window at the bird feeder hanging near the oak tree. My mind refused to process what I had just heard. Married yesterday. Yesterday. Not next month. Not next week. Yesterday. "You mean the wedding already happened?" I asked quietly. "Yes," Emily said. "Ryan thought he told you." "Ryan thought he told me." I felt my grip tighten around the phone. Across the room, the clock above the stove continued ticking as though nothing had changed. Emily kept talking, explaining how everything came together quickly. How they decided to keep it small. How wonderful the day had been. I heard the words, but they seemed distant, muffled, almost unreal. Eventually the call ended. I do not remember exactly how. I only remember standing there afterward in complete silence. Then I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the empty chair across from me. The chair where Ryan used to sit when he was a little boy eating cereal before school. The chair where he sat years later telling me about college. The chair where he announced he was engaged. I picked up my phone and called him immediately. He answered after the second ring. "Hey, Mom." His voice sounded perfectly normal. "Ryan," I said carefully, "Emily told me you got married yesterday." Silence. Just a few seconds, but long enough. And in that silence I realized something was terribly wrong. The silence on the other end of the line lasted only a few seconds, but it felt much longer. Long enough for a mother to understand that the answer she was about to receive would hurt. "Mom," Ryan finally said, "I was going to call you." I closed my eyes. Those 6 words did not make anything better. In fact, they made it worse. "When?" I asked quietly. Another pause followed. "Soon," he replied. Soon. It was such a small word. Such an empty word. I looked around my kitchen and suddenly noticed all the little reminders of how excited I had been about the wedding. A bridal magazine sat on the counter because I had saved a few decoration ideas. A notebook rested beside the refrigerator where I had written possible gift ideas. For months, I had been preparing for a celebration that had already happened without me. Who was there? I asked. Ryan hesitated again. Just close family and a few friends. My chest tightened. Close family. The phrase echoed inside my head. Close family, I repeated. So apparently I am not included in that category anymore. Mom, it is not like that. His voice sounded uncomfortable now. Nervous. Then explain it to me. For the first time in my life, my son seemed unable to find words. Eventually he said, everything came together quickly. I stared at the family photographs hanging on the wall. One showed Ryan at age 8 holding a baseball trophy. Another showed him graduating from college. Another showed the two of us standing together after he bought his first home. In every photograph I saw years of birthdays, school events, holidays, and sacrifices. I saw a mother who never missed a milestone. Until now. Did Emily's mother attend? I asked. The answer came immediately. Yes. I swallowed hard. What about her father? Yes. Her sister? Yes. Each answer felt like another small crack forming in something I had always believed was unbreakable. Finally, I asked the question I was almost afraid to hear answered. Was I the only parent who was not there? The silence returned. This time it told me everything. Ryan never actually answered because he did not need to. I already knew. After ending the call, I sat alone for nearly an hour. Then my phone began vibrating with notifications. Messages from friends, distant relatives, former neighbors, one after another. First, I did not understand why. Then I opened social media. The wedding photographs had been posted. There was Emily smiling in a white dress. There was Ryan standing beside her. There were guests gathered around them. There was laughter, celebration, happiness. I continued scrolling. Front row seats filled with Emily's family. Group photographs. Reception pictures. Toasts. Smiles everywhere. The only thing missing was me. I stared at one particular photograph for several minutes. Emily's mother stood beside the bride, holding her hand. The caption underneath read, "A perfect family moment." I put the phone down and stared out the window. Across the street, children rode bicycles through the neighborhood as the evening sun slowly disappeared. And for the first time, a question entered my mind that I never thought I would ask. This was not about forgetting to invite me. This was about making sure I was never invited at all. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, another wedding photograph appeared in my mind. Emily smiling beside her mother. Ryan standing proudly in his suit. Friends and relatives celebrating around them. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they belonged. Everyone except me. The next morning I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table with my phone beside me. For several minutes I simply stared at the screen. Then curiosity overcame common sense, and I opened the wedding album again. There were more than 100 photographs. I told myself I would only look at a few. Instead, I examined every single one. The deeper I scrolled, the worse it became. There was a photograph of Emily and her mother getting ready together before the ceremony. Another showed Emily's father walking her toward the venue entrance. There were family portraits, group pictures, candid moments during dinner, and speeches during the reception. Every important moment had been carefully documented. Every important person had been included. I searched every photograph looking for some explanation, some clue that might help me understand. Instead, I found something else. Intention. This was not a rushed courthouse ceremony with 2 witnesses. This was a planned event. Flowers had been ordered. Professional photography had been arranged. Guests had traveled to attend. Seating charts had been prepared. Decorations matched specific color themes. None of that happened overnight, which meant one thing. People had known about this wedding for weeks, maybe months. My phone rang around noon. It was Susan Walker, my closest friend for nearly 40 years. The moment I answered, she sounded confused. "Patricia, why didn't you tell me Ryan got married?" I laughed softly, not because anything was funny, because I did not know what else to do. "I found out yesterday." Silence followed. "What?" Susan asked. "How is that possible?" I explained everything. The phone call, Emily's comment, the photographs, the missing invitation. By the time I finished, Susan sounded just as shocked as I had been. "That does not make any sense," she said. "Everyone assumed you were there." Those words stayed with me long after the conversation ended. Everyone assumed you were there. That afternoon I received several more calls. Friends, extended relatives, former neighbors. Every conversation followed the same pattern. Surprise. Confusion. Disbelief. Nobody understood why I had been excluded. Then, late that evening, something happened that caught my attention. One of Ryan's college friends posted additional wedding pictures online. Most were ordinary. Then I noticed one image buried near the end of the album. It showed guests seated before the ceremony began. I enlarged the photograph, studied every face, and suddenly I saw something strange. An empty seat sat near the front row. Not just any seat, a reserved seat, A printed card rested on it. The image quality was poor, but after zooming in several times I could just make out a few letters. The first name appeared to begin with a P. My heart began beating faster. I enlarged the image again. The picture blurred. Still, something about it felt important. Why would there be an empty reserved seat near the front? Why would nobody be sitting there? And why did I have the unsettling feeling that whoever belonged in that chair never received the chance to occupy it? For the first time since discovering the truth, I began to suspect there was more to this story than anyone had told me. The photograph stayed on my mind for the next 2 days. I told myself it was probably nothing. A blurry image. Coincidence. Maybe the reserved seat belonged to a guest who arrived late or decided not to attend. Yet every time I tried convincing myself, the same question returned. Why did that empty chair feel so personal? On Thursday morning, Susan called again. This time her voice carried a different tone. "Patricia," she said, "I ran into someone yesterday who attended the wedding." I sat up straighter in my chair. "Who?" "One of Emily's cousins." My pulse quickened. Susan hesitated. "She assumed you were there." I laughed softly. "Everyone assumes that."
"No," Susan replied.
"You do not understand." She specifically asked whether you enjoyed the ceremony. For a moment I said nothing. The room seemed unusually quiet. Outside, a light breeze moved through the trees lining my street. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "The truth." Susan paused. She looked shocked. That single reaction bothered me more than anything else. Shock suggested expectation. Expectation suggested information. Information suggested someone had reason to believe I would be present. After ending the call, I returned to the wedding photographs once more. This time I paid attention to details rather than emotions. Seating arrangements, family groupings, table placements. Then I noticed something else. In several reception photographs, place cards were visible on a guest table near the front of the room. I enlarged the image. Most names remained impossible to read. One did not. Patricia Morgan. My breath caught. I enlarged the image again. There it was. Clear enough to identify. A printed place card with my name. I stared at the screen in disbelief. My name had been included. My seat had been prepared. Yet I never received an invitation. I never received a phone call. I never received an address, a date, or even basic information. Suddenly the situation felt very different. Before, I believed I had simply been excluded. Now it appeared someone expected me to attend at some point during the planning process. Later that afternoon my phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. Normally I ignored unknown calls, but something prompted me to answer. "Mrs. Morgan?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes. My name is Heather. I am one of the wedding coordinators who worked at the venue." My heart skipped. "How can I help you?" There was a brief pause. "I hope this is not inappropriate, but several staff members have been discussing something since the wedding. We all assumed there had been a misunderstanding." I gripped the phone tighter. What kind of misunderstanding? The groom spent part of the morning asking whether someone named Patricia had arrived. The room seemed to stop moving. "What?" I whispered. "He appeared concerned," Heather continued. "He checked several times. For a moment I could not speak. Ryan had asked about me. More than once." Heather apologized for calling unexpectedly and ended the conversation shortly afterward. But her words remained. Ryan spent part of the morning asking whether someone named Patricia had arrived. I slowly sat down at the kitchen table. For the first time since learning about the wedding, a new possibility entered my mind. What if the story I had been told was incomplete? What if the reason I missed the wedding was not the same reason everyone wanted me to believe? For the next 24 hours I could think about little else. Every new piece of information seemed to contradict the last. Emily acted as though my absence had been completely normal. Yet there was a place card with my name. Ryan supposedly accepted that I was not there. Yet he spent part of the wedding day asking whether I had arrived. The facts no longer fit together. On Friday morning I decided to stop guessing. Instead of replaying conversations in my head, I began making phone calls. The first person I contacted was a distant cousin who attended the wedding. We had not spoken in months, but she answered immediately. After a few minutes of polite conversation, I carefully brought up the ceremony. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Of course. Did anyone mention me that day?" There was a pause. "Actually, yes." My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" "Well, before the ceremony started, there seemed to be some confusion." I leaned forward in my chair. "Confusion?" "A few guests were asking where you were. Someone said you were running late." "Running late?" I stared at the wall across from me. "Not absent. Not uninvited. Running late. Who said that?" I asked. Another pause followed. "I think it was Emily's mother. Carol Carter." The answer landed heavily. For several seconds, I simply listened to the silence on the line. After ending the call, I walked slowly through my house. Every room carried memories of Ryan growing up. School projects, birthday parties, family holidays. Looking at those memories, I found myself asking the same question repeatedly. Why would anyone tell guests I was running late if they knew I had never been invited? That afternoon, Susan stopped by with coffee and pastries. We sat on the back patio while autumn leaves drifted across the yard. I shared everything I had learned. The place card, the wedding coordinator, the cousin's story. Susan listened carefully. When I finished, she shook her head. "Patricia, this sounds like someone expected you to be there." "Exactly. Or expected everyone else to believe you were supposed to be there." Her words stopped me cold. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then my phone buzzed. A new message appeared from an unfamiliar number. Normally, I would have ignored it. Instead, I opened it immediately. The message contained only one sentence. "I think you deserve to know the truth." Attached beneath it was a screenshot of an email. My hands trembled as I enlarged the image. The sender was Ryan. The recipient list included several members of both families. The date was nearly 3 months before the wedding. The subject line read "Wedding Guest List." I scanned the names. Friends, relatives, family members. Then I found mine. Patricia Morgan. Included. Not crossed out. Not removed. Included. My heart began racing. If Ryan placed me on the guest list, then at some point he intended for me to attend. Which meant something happened later. Something changed. At the bottom of the screenshot, another message appeared. It was shorter than the first. "Ask Emily who removed your name." I stared at those words for a long time. Then I slowly lowered the phone. Because for the first time since this nightmare began, I was no longer wondering whether I had been forgotten. I was beginning to understand that someone had made a deliberate decision. And I was starting to suspect exactly who that person might be. I spent the entire weekend thinking about that message. "Ask Emily who removed your name." The words lingered in my mind no matter how hard I tried to focus on something else. By Sunday evening, I realized I could no longer pretend I did not want answers. The following morning, I called Ryan and asked if we could meet for lunch. His response came almost immediately. "Of course, Mom." We agreed to meet at a small restaurant we used to visit when he was younger. The place had not changed much over the years. The same brick walls, the same booths, the same framed photographs hanging near the entrance. When I arrived, Ryan was already there waiting. For a moment, seeing him sitting alone reminded me of the little boy who used to reach across the table and steal French fries from my plate. But that feeling disappeared the moment we sat down. There was too much uncertainty between us now. We exchanged polite conversation while waiting for our food. Neither of us mentioned the wedding. Not at first. Finally, after the waitress walked away, I placed my phone on the table and opened the screenshot of the guest list. Ryan looked down at it. Then he froze. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. "That does not matter." I held his gaze. "Is it real?" He stared at the image for several seconds before nodding. "Yes." My heart sank and lifted at the same time. Sank because it confirmed everything. Lifted because I was finally getting the truth. "So I was invited?" I asked. Ryan immediately shook his head. "You were supposed to be invited." Supposed to be invited. The distinction mattered. What happened? He looked away toward the restaurant window. Outside, cars moved through the afternoon traffic while people went about their ordinary lives. Inside, my entire understanding of the wedding hung on his answer. "At first, you were on every list," he admitted. Every draft, every seating chart, every family schedule. I felt my pulse quicken. Then why was I not there? Ryan rubbed his forehead. The guilt on his face was impossible to miss. Because Emily did not want conflict. I frowned. Conflict. She believed there would be tension between you and her mother. I stared at him. We have never had a serious argument. I know. His voice dropped lower. I told her that. The room suddenly felt smaller. Then why did she remove me? Ryan hesitated. For a moment I thought he might avoid the question. Instead he sighed deeply. Because her mother convinced her it would be easier if only one family took a central role in the wedding. I sat perfectly still. Easier. Such a simple word. Such a damaging word. Ryan continued speaking. He explained how discussions gradually changed over several months. How certain decisions were presented as practical compromises. How each small change seemed insignificant on its own. Until eventually my invitation disappeared entirely. I should have stopped it, he said quietly. I know that now. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Then I asked one final question. Did Emily ever tell me I was removed? He looked directly into my eyes. No. Inudda slowly. Everything suddenly made sense. The missing invitation. The empty seat. The confusion among guests. The story about me running late. Someone had expected questions. They simply hoped nobody would ask too many. And as I sat across from my son that afternoon, I realized the truth was finally beginning to emerge from behind months of carefully arranged silence. After lunch, I drove home feeling strangely calm. For weeks, I had been searching for answers. Now I finally had some. Not all of them, but enough to understand what happened. The most painful part was not learning that I had been removed from the guest list. The most painful part was realizing how many opportunities existed to tell me the truth. Every conversation, every phone call, every family gathering leading up to the wedding. At any moment, someone could have simply said, Patricia, we changed our plans. Instead, silence had been chosen. Over the next several days, I made a decision that surprised even me. I stopped investigating. I stopped searching through photographs. I stopped replaying old conversations. The facts were clear now. Continuing to dig would not change what had happened. For the first time since that phone call from Emily, I focused on myself instead of them. I returned to my normal routines. Morning walks through the neighborhood. Coffee with Susan. Volunteer work at the community center. Simple things that reminded me my entire life did not begin and end with one disappointing event. Yet something else happened during that week. People started talking. Not because I encouraged it. Because the truth has a way of moving on its own. Friends who attended the wedding began asking questions. Relatives compared stories. Guests who assumed I had declined the invitation learned that I never received one. The confusion that had quietly existed beneath the surface slowly became impossible to ignore. One evening, Susan called with an update. You are not going to believe this, she said. Several people confronted Carol at a family gathering. I leaned back in my chair. What happened? They asked why Ryan's mother was missing from the wedding. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I imagined the uncomfortable silence that must have followed. And Susan laughed softly. Apparently nobody got a straight answer. That did not surprise me. Difficult questions rarely produce easy explanations. A few days later, Ryan called again. This time he sounded exhausted. Mom, he said quietly. People keep asking about the wedding. I listened without interrupting. I never realized how many people noticed you were missing. There was genuine regret in his voice. Not regret because he was being questioned. Regret because he was finally seeing the situation through other people's eyes. I am sorry, he said again. I know. The words came easily now. Not because I was completely healed. Because carrying anger was becoming too heavy. Later that night, I sat on my back porch watching the sunset. The sky glowed with shades of orange and gold as autumn settled over the neighborhood. For the first time in weeks I felt peaceful. Not because anyone had apologized. Not because anyone had admitted fault. But because I finally understood something important. I did not need to argue. I did not need to demand explanations. I did not need to convince anyone of my value. The people who truly cared about me already knew it. And the people who chose otherwise would eventually have to live with their own decisions. As darkness slowly settled across the yard, my phone buzzed with a new message. The sender's name stopped me cold. It was Emily. And after everything that had happened, she was finally ready to talk. I stared at Emily's message for nearly 10 minutes before responding. It was not a long message. In fact, it contained only a single sentence. Can we meet and talk? A month earlier, I would have answered immediately. Now I took my time. Eventually, I replied with a simple yes. We agreed to meet the following afternoon at a quiet coffee shop across town. When I arrived, Emily was already there. She sat alone near a window, turning a paper coffee cup slowly between her hands. The confidence she usually carried seemed absent. For the first time since I met her, she looked nervous. I sat down across from her. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then Emily took a deep breath. I owe you an apology. The words surprised me. Not because I never expected to hear them, because I expected excuses first. Explanations. Defenses. Attempts to shift responsibility. Instead, she began with an apology. You should have been there, she said quietly. I know that now. I listened without interrupting. Emily looked down at the table. When we first started planning the wedding, Ryan wanted you involved in everything. I already suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed still mattered. Then things became complicated. I waited. Eventually she continued. My mother convinced me that combining both families would create unnecessary stress. The explanation sounded familiar, almost rehearsed. Yet something about her tone suggested she was finally being honest with herself. At first it was small decisions, she admitted. Then larger ones. Every compromise seemed reasonable until suddenly your invitation was gone. I watched her carefully. And nobody thought to tell me? Emily lowered her eyes. The silence answered before she did. I was embarrassed, she finally said. The longer it went on, the harder it became to admit what happened. For the first time I saw genuine regret. Not regret because people were asking questions. Not regret because the truth had surfaced. Regret because she finally understood the damage caused by avoiding one difficult conversation. We spoke for more than an hour. She answered every question honestly. No arguments. No excuses. Just facts. By the end, one reality became clear. Nobody had forgotten me. Nobody had accidentally overlooked me. A series of choices had been made. Some intentional. Some passive. Some driven by convenience. Together, those choices created the same result. My absence. Before leaving, Emily reached into her purse and removed a small envelope. She slid it across the table. What is this? I asked. Something that belongs to you. Inside was a wedding program. My name appeared near the front under the section labeled Family of the Groom. For several seconds I simply stared at it. There it was. Proof that I had once been included in the story. Proof that someone changed the ending along the way. Emily's eyes filled with tears. I cannot undo what happened, she said softly. But I wanted you to know that Ryan never stopped wanting you there. I nodded slowly. Then I placed the program back inside the envelope. When we stood to leave, neither of us hugged. Neither of us pretended everything was fixed. Some wounds require time. But as I walked back to my car, I realized something important. The truth no longer belonged to rumors, assumptions, or missing photographs. The truth had finally been spoken aloud. And once the truth exists in the open, everyone must decide what to do with it. Several months passed after my conversation with Emily. Life slowly settled into a new rhythm. Not the same rhythm as before, but a quieter and more honest one. Ryan visited more often. Sometimes we talked about what happened. Sometimes we talked about ordinary things like work, weather, and family memories. The important difference was that neither of us pretended anymore. The truth had removed something from our relationship, but it had also returned something. Honesty. One Saturday afternoon, Ryan stopped by carrying a small photo album. We sat together at the kitchen table while sunlight streamed through the windows. I wanted you to have these, he said. Inside were printed photographs from the wedding. At first, I was not sure I wanted to see them. Then I began turning the pages. There was Ryan smiling during the ceremony. There was Emily standing beside him. There were family photographs I had already seen online. Then I noticed something unexpected. Tucked between several pages was a picture I had never seen before. It showed the front row before the ceremony began. There, clearly visible, was the empty reserved seat. My seat. The place card with my name sat exactly where it had always belonged. For a moment, neither Ryan nor I spoke. Then he quietly said, "I looked at that chair all day." I felt tears form in my eyes. Not because of the photograph. Because of the regret in his voice. "I should have called you," he said. "I should have fixed it before it got that far." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "Yes," I replied gently. "You should have." The honesty of that moment mattered more than any apology. Healing does not begin when people avoid the truth. Healing begins when they finally face it. As the months continued, Emily also made an effort. Not through grand gestures. Through consistency. Phone calls. Invitations. Small acts that demonstrated understanding rather than obligation. Trust did not return immediately. Trust rarely does. But little by little new memories began forming beside the painful old ones. One evening, nearly a year after the wedding, the entire family gathered for dinner at my house. Nothing formal. No special occasion. Just family. As I looked around the table, I noticed something that would have been impossible 12 months earlier. Nobody was pretending. Nobody was managing appearances. Nobody was trying to create a perfect image. People were simply being honest. And somehow that felt more meaningful than any carefully planned ceremony ever could. Later that night, after everyone left, I walked through the quiet house and paused beside the family photographs hanging on the wall. For weeks after the wedding, I believed the story was about exclusion, about being left out, about an invitation that never arrived. Looking back now, I understand it differently. The real story was about self-worth. For a long time, I believed being included by others determined my value. I was wrong. My value never depended on a wedding invitation. It never depended on a seat assignment. It never depended on whether someone else chose to recognize my place in the family. The day I stopped waiting for permission to matter was the day everything changed. Some memories still hurt. Some questions may never be fully answered. But I no longer carry anger. I carry perspective. And if I learned anything from this experience, it is that the people who truly belong in your life will eventually show you the truth through their actions. As for me, I no longer measure love by invitations received. I measure it by honesty given. And that lesson turned out to be far more valuable than any wedding day ever could have been.